Imagine for a moment that you're walking down a busy street, surrounded by hundreds of people, yet feeling completely alone. It's not the physical solitude that troubles you, it's something deeper, more visceral. It's the sensation that, even while being present, you don't truly belong anywhere. Albert Camus, the Franco-Algerian philosopher who taught us about the absurd nature of existence, identified this condition as one of the most authentic experiences of modern human beings. Today, we'll explore 5 silent characteristics of those who never find belonging. Characteristics that Camus observed in himself and in the universal human condition. Have you ever wondered why some people always seem to be on the margins, even when they're at the center of a group? Why certain souls seem to carry an inexplicable melancholy, a constant search for something they can never name? Camus lived this experience firsthand. Born in Algeria, the son of a poor family, orphaned by his father from a very young age, he knew from early on the sensation of not completely belonging either to the Arab world or to the French one. This experience of rootlessness would become central to his philosophy and help us understand a condition that affects millions of people around the world. The first silent characteristic of those who never find belonging is hypersensitivity to the absurdity of social conventions. These people possess an almost painful ability to see through the masks that society teaches us to wear. While others are content to participate in social rituals without question, those who don't find belonging perceive the artificiality of these interactions with cutting clarity. They observe superficial conversations, forced smiles, trivial concerns, and feel a profound disconnection. They cannot feign genuine interest in discussions about the weather when their souls yearn for conversations about the meaning of existence. This hypersensitivity is not arrogance or superiority. It's an open wound that constantly bleeds. Camus described this condition as an acute awareness of life's absurdity, the perception that much of what we consider important is, in reality, a fragile construction to avoid confronting existential emptiness. These people frequently find themselves in social situations, feeling like observers of a theater, where everyone knows the script except them. They participate in the performances, but always with the sensation of playing a role that doesn't quite fit them. There's an almost brutal authenticity in their natures that makes it difficult to accept the small social lies that lubricate human relationships. When someone asks how they are, they genuinely want to respond with honesty, but they realize the question is merely ritual, not an invitation to vulnerability. This perception gradually distances them from conventional social circles, not by choice, but due to a fundamental incompatibility between their authentic nature and the demands of superficial socialization. The second characteristic is a complex and ambivalent relationship with solitude. Contrary to what one might think, these people don't flee from solitude. They embrace it, but with a mixture of relief and melancholy that's difficult to explain. Solitude becomes simultaneously refuge and prison. It's in silence that they find themselves, away from the constant demands of social performance. But it's also in solitude that the sensation of disconnection intensifies. Camus wrote extensively about this duality, describing how solitude can be both liberating and devastating. For those who don't find belonging, being alone means not having to pretend, not having to conform, not having to explain their contemplative nature to a world that values extroversion and superficiality. But this solitude isn't chosen completely consciously. It's often the result of failed attempts to connect authentically with others. After repeated experiences of feeling misunderstood or judged for their depth, these people gradually withdraw. They discover it's safer to be alone than vulnerable in company that can't grasp their complexity. Solitude becomes a form of self-preservation, but also a source of suffering, because the human desire for connection remains intact, only frustrated. They find themselves in a cycle where solitude protects them from disappointment, but also deprives them of the possibility of finding someone who truly understands them. This relationship with solitude also manifests in an exceptional capacity to be with themselves. While many people desperately flee from silence and introspection, those who don't find belonging develop a profound intimacy with their own thoughts and feelings. They become their own most constant companions, developing a rich and complex inner life that partially compensates for the lack of meaningful external connections. However, this compensation is never complete, and there always remains a latent desire to share this inner richness with someone who could truly appreciate it. The third characteristic is a constant and never satisfied search for authentic meaning. These people cannot be content with the prefabricated meanings that society offers. They find no lasting satisfaction in professional success, the accumulation of material goods, or even in relationships that don't transcend the superficial. There's an existential hunger that consumes them, a need to find something that makes all the pain of existence worthwhile. Camus called this the search for the absolute in a relative world, the quest for certainties in a fundamentally uncertain universe. This search leads them down diverse paths, often simultaneously. They may turn to art, trying to find in creation or aesthetic contemplation that transcendence which escapes in daily interactions. They may dive into philosophy, literature, spirituality, always looking for that fundamental truth that will give meaning to existence. But here lies a cruel irony. Their search for authentic meaning makes them even more aware of the arbitrariness of all meanings. The more they search, the more they realize that perhaps there is no final answer, no ultimate meaning that resolves all existential questions. This search also makes them extremely sensitive to hypocrisy and superficiality. They can detect when someone is repeating platitudes about life's meaning without having truly confronted existential emptiness. They may feel irritated or saddened when they hear simplistic advice like, "Be grateful for what you have," or "Everything happens for a reason." Not because this advice is necessarily wrong, but because it's offered without genuine understanding of the depth of existential questioning. This sensitivity further distances them from conventional sources of meaning and community, perpetuating their sense of not belonging. Leave a comment about which of these characteristics resonates most with your own experience. Your reflection might help other people who feel the same way realize they're not alone in this existential journey. Sharing these experiences is one of the first steps in transforming isolation into mutual understanding. The fourth characteristic is an intense emotional sensitivity that functions like an antenna for human suffering. These people not only feel their own pain with amplified intensity, but also absorb others' suffering almost inevitably. They perceive sadness in a stranger's eyes on the street, feel the weight of collective melancholy, pick up waves of despair that permeate human existence. This emotional hypersensitivity is both gift and curse. On one hand, it grants them an extraordinary capacity for empathy and understanding. On the other, it burdens them with an emotional weight that can be unbearable. Camus wrote about how direct confrontation with human suffering can lead to both compassion and despair. Those who don't find belonging frequently find themselves in the position of informal counselors, people to whom others feel naturally inclined to confess their pains and fears. There's something in their contemplative nature and the depth of their gaze that invites confidence. But this position, while momentarily connecting them with others, also exposes them to a disproportionate amount of others' suffering, without them necessarily having the tools or support to process all this emotional load. This sensitivity also manifests in difficulty establishing healthy emotional boundaries. They may find themselves exhausted after social interactions, not because they're introverted, but because they unconsciously absorb the emotions of everyone around them. They might leave a party feeling heavy with concerns that weren't even theirs, but that somehow became part of their emotional experience. This characteristic makes them natural counselors, but also distances them from environments where they would constantly need to protect themselves from emotional overload. Emotional intensity also means they experience both joy and sadness in amplified ways. When touched by beauty, whether in nature, art, or a moment of genuine human connection, they feel an elevation that can be almost spiritual. But when confronted with cruelty, injustice, or simply the banality of daily existence, they experience a proportional fall. This emotional roller coaster can be exhausting and contribute to a sense that they are different, that they experience life more intensely than most people around them. The fifth and perhaps most profound characteristic is an acute awareness of finitude and mortality that permeates all their experiences. While most people manage to live most of the time forgetting or denying the reality of death, those who don't find belonging carry this awareness as constant company. It's not a morbid obsession, but a clear perception that all moments are borrowed, that all connections are temporary, that all construction of meaning is made against the backdrop of transience. This awareness of mortality colors all their experiences with a quality that's simultaneously precious and melancholic. They might be in a pleasant conversation and suddenly be struck by the perception that this moment will never repeat exactly like this again, that the people present won't be here one day, that they themselves are only temporary visitors to this world. This perception can make it difficult to surrender completely to life's simple pleasures, not because they don't appreciate them, but because there's always an underlying awareness of their ephemeral nature. Camus saw this awareness of mortality not as a curse but as a door to authenticity. When we truly understand that our time is limited, we're forced to confront questions about how we want to live, about what really matters, about how to create meaning in the face of death's certainty. Those who don't find belonging often live with an existential urgency that others don't feel. They cannot be content with lives lived on autopilot because their awareness of finitude makes every choice loaded with meaning. This perception of transience also influences their ability to form bonds. They may find themselves hesitant to attach deeply because they know that every connection will eventually end, whether through change, growth in different directions, or death. Paradoxically, this hesitation to attach can prevent them from experiencing exactly the deep connections that could alleviate their sense of not belonging. They find themselves trapped between the desire to connect and the fear of the inevitable loss that accompanies every genuine connection. If you identified with these characteristics, consider subscribing to the channel. We continue exploring the depths of human experience through the lens of existentialist philosophy, offering perspectives that can bring clarity and even comfort to those who feel displaced in the world. But it would be a mistake to end this exploration without addressing the fundamental question that arises. If these are characteristics of those who never find belonging, is there any hope of connection and acceptance for these people? Camus, despite recognizing the reality of absurdity and alienation, was not a pessimist. He believed that awareness of the absurd could lead not to despair, but to a particular form of freedom and even joy. For those who recognize themselves in these characteristics, it's important to understand that their sense of not belonging is not necessarily a failure or pathology. It may be instead a natural and even healthy response to a world that frequently values superficiality over depth, conformity over authenticity, distraction over contemplation. Their difficulty in fitting in may be a sign that they're seeking something more genuine, more meaningful than what conventional social structures offer. Belonging for these people, when it finally happens, rarely comes through traditional channels. It won't necessarily be found in large groups, formal organizations, or communities based on superficial interests. Instead, it tends to emerge in moments of mutual recognition with other souls who share a similar depth of questioning and sensitivity. It can happen through a deep conversation with a stranger, through silent recognition between two people who perceive the same melancholy in the world, through discovering an artist, writer, or thinker whose work resonates with their inner experience. Camus taught us that we can imagine Sisyphus happy, that even in eternal condemnation, to push a stone uphill only to watch it roll back down, there can be a form of contentment found in the act itself, in consciousness, in the refusal to surrender to despair. Similarly, those who carry these silent characteristics of not belonging can find a unique form of joy, not in denying their nature, but in its complete acceptance. There's a particular beauty in being one who questions, who feels deeply, who doesn't settle for easy answers. There's dignity in maintaining your sensitivity in a world that frequently rewards numbness. There's courage in continuing to seek authentic connections even after repeated disappointments. These characteristics, while they may create isolation, also create the possibility of richer, more genuine, more deeply human experiences. Belonging, for these people, may need to be redefined. Perhaps it's not about finding a group where they fit perfectly, but about finding moments of recognition, instances of mutual understanding, experiences of shared beauty that make all the previous isolation bearable. Perhaps it's about learning to belong first to themselves, to honor their own depth and sensitivity as valid and valuable gifts, even when the world doesn't always recognize them as such. Albert Camus left us with the image of the absurd man who, conscious of the universe's inherent lack of meaning, chooses to live fully anyway. For those who never find belonging in the conventional sense, there exists the possibility of finding a different way of being in the world, one that honors their unique nature, while remaining open to the unexpected possibilities of connection and meaning that can emerge precisely from their difference.